The First World War began with Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia on June 28, 1914, in response to the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. This would lead to a domino chain of countries joining the war to support their allies. Many soldiers were told that the war would be completed by Christmas. Kaiser Wilhelm II said that the soldiers would return before the leaves fell on the ground. Sadly, this would not be the case, as by the winter of 1914, the troops were hunkered in their trenches, dreaming of home. Luckily, in Christmas of 1914, the war was temporarily stopped by an undeclared truce, allowing both sides to celebrate the festivities together, exchanging gifts and playing football. Sadly, however, the war continued the next day, and no other Christmas truces were to occur on a major scale. The Great War would become the most deadly war in European history up to that point. Finally, however, the war would come to a halt with the signing of the armistice in November of 1918. In this video, we will discuss the war's end and the troops returning for Christmas that year. After the 100-day campaign, the Germans were almost completely out of supplies. The German people were starving due to the blockade and had enough of the Kaiser's ignorance towards the people and the war. Late into the night, the Germans asked Marshal Ferdinand Foch, commander-in-chief of the Entente forces, if the Germans could send delegates across the front lines to negotiate an armistice. On November 7th, delegates went into France and rode the train to the force of Compiègne, where the meeting would take place. In the railroad car, the Entente asked for the evacuation of Germans from French land. The Entente would also take everything 10 kilometers east of the Rhine, while the rest of the Rhine region would become a demilitarized zone. Finally, the Germans would disarm and relinquish all militarized vehicles, ships, and planes. The Germans, reluctantly, agreed to these terms. The armistice would take effect on 11 a.m. on November 11th. While the Treaty of Versailles would not be fully negotiated until the next year, the war for the soldiers was over. After the war had concluded, millions of troops began returning home, hopefully able to see Christmas. German soldiers returned home only to see the German state in ruin. Kaiser Wilhelm had abdicated before the armistice signing, leaving control to the Weimar Republic, but a large amount of other extreme parties also wanted to revolt. The main problem was food. Germany was a heavily industrial nation and usually had to import food to keep people fed. During the war, the British blockaded the North Sea, so Germany was not able to get those vital supplies to keep their troops, but also their people, fed. This was extremely effective and is one of the biggest reasons why Germany lost the war. By 1918, Germany was extremely low on food and many people were on the brink of starvation. With the armistice signed, many thought that and hoped that the blockade would also come to the end, because the German delegates requested it in the conference. Sadly, however, the British never ended the blockade, fearing the Germans might try to rearm themselves and begin the war again. By Christmas, Germany could be considered on its last legs before collapse. The Americans had a plan from Herbert Hoover that sent food through Sweden, which was not affected by the British blockade, which many thought it would be a Christmas miracle for the Germans. Sadly, the British and the French found out about this plan and ended it before it started. Thousands of Germans died that Christmas and the months that follow. While other countries did have food for the winter, the returning troops also meant the reintroduction of the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu originated, contrary to its name, in Kansas and quickly spread across the world, partially because of the American troops coming over to the war. This would become the first wave. The flu had been widespread across the trenches, causing large deaths of soldiers. The second and most deadly of the waves was primarily caused by two factors. The first was the soldiers returning home from the war. Not only were the soldiers bringing more infected people, but they were also bringing the flu to other parts of the British and French empires, such as India and South Africa. The second reason was that with the war won, many people would go out and celebrate in pubs and other places, spreading the disease. In Manchester, all schools were closed until the new year in response to disease, which backfired because the children ended up playing with each other instead of staying away from contact. The wave would end just before Christmas, but it was genuinely sad that many soldiers returned home only to die from the Spanish flu. The Christmas season and New Year's festivities would cause a third wave, but was considerably smaller. A new vaccine was developed that dampened the flu, but it would remain in the form of all modern flus today. Soldiers returning home sometimes ended up in worse conditions than in the war. While most could not return home immediately, some could come home for the holidays. Some were able to come to their families and it was the best Christmas gift for them and their families. But sadly, even after the return home, most had very little. The government gave only $60 to soldiers after discharge on top of their salaries, meaning many would become unemployed and some even homeless, which sadly continues to be a problem today. Many black soldiers were treated horribly and were not recognized for their heroics. Ultimately, Christmas of 1918 was kind of depressing, especially when looking at the bigger picture. But ultimately, the one thing to remember is that one of the largest conflicts in world history was over. The armistice would be remembered with multiple holidays, while multiple monuments would be erected in honor of those who served. Ultimately, the promise made to those soldiers was finally fulfilled 5 years late.